Hey folks, and welcome back. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Today, I'm going to be starting a huge project. Now, if you've been following the channel at all, you may know that I've been building a city, basically designing a city from the ground up for my next campaign. And one thing that any city needs is a church or place of worship. Now, this city is going to be Greco-Roman, for like a Greco-Roman fantasy setting, so the ones that I already have aren't really appropriate to that. Now, this is a place that the players are going to come back to over and over for various quest reasons, so it needs to be big, it needs to be interesting, and it needs to be imposing. It actually also connects to the catacombs that extend underneath the city, so it's going to play an important role in the story. And I have found the perfect, giant, imposing building to convert into this fantasy temple. Okay, it's not imposing yet. It's gonna take a little work. Okay, needless to say, I've gotten a few funny looks from people when I've told them what my plans are for this. Somehow they're just not seeing imposing Roman temple. I don't know why not, but that's fine. I actually picked this up for about $2 at a garage sale, and I think that makes it a pretty good purchase, and it's going to be a lot of fun converting it into fantasy terrain. Hopefully. Maybe. Alright, but if we're going to do that, I'm going to need a plan. So that's where we're going to start. Let's get moving. The first step in making a plan is to decide what you want the finished product to be. There are basically 6 spaces that can be used on this dollhouse. 7 if you count the elevator, which I do since I have a plan for it. The top 2 rooms in the temple are going to be administrative. One is going to be the head cleric's office, and the other is going to be an armory for the various clerics, paladins, and so on that work out of the temple. Life and religion in the ancient world could be some pretty grim or odd stuff at times, and though I don't expect my players to directly interact with it, though they might, you know what players are like, I do want to reflect that aspect of ancient life in my setting. So on the bottom left, where the garage is now, is going to be an area of the temple meant for sacrifices. Dark, I know, but it's going to add nuance and character. Sometimes ancient religious rites also involved bathing and cleansing the body, so the section on the bottom right is going to be for bathing rituals, maybe some fountains and a public bath, that sort of thing. That leaves the middle 2 rooms for the spirit garden, a feature of my own setting where various different spirits are worshipped and left offerings. This is the main component of the local faith, so it gets an entire floor to itself. So with the plan in place, my next step is getting rid of all of the distinctly dollhouse features, starting with the doorbell and porch lights. There's actually a fair bit to do here. Anything that makes the toy look modern has to go. It's not always an easy or pleasant job, but you just can't have a Roman temple with a white picket fence or a modern garage door. That also meant getting rid of all of those floor panel stickers, and God, they did not want to come off. I started by trying to scrape them off with a bit of isopropyl alcohol, but ended up using Goo Gone instead. It still took way longer than I want to admit, but perseverance did win out. Eventually. The next step when working with a toy is to cover up as many of the details that make its toy-like nature obvious as possible, starting with things like the screws that hold it together. Now, this is also a good time to fix all of the extra holes we just put in the project by ripping out old features. I start that process with aluminum foil. Just a little bit of it balled up is enough to start filling in those holes. After this, I cover it over with Milliput. Filling the gaps with foil first lets you keep your material costs low, especially when there are this many gaps to fill. Now, I'm not going to worry about filling the gaps inside the dollhouse, since it would be a lot of work for very little payoff. It's not going to affect how the temple looks in the end. Once the gaps are filled with foil, I mix up some Milliput and smooth it over top. Now, if you're familiar with Milliput, you should know that you can use a little bit of water to make it much easier to create a smooth surface. And if you can't quite get there, it's fine. You can always come back later with sandpaper and smooth it out. The biggest and most problematic gap to fill is, of course, where I rip the fence out. but this really just gets smoothed over the same way: foil, milliput, and then once it's dry, sandpaper. There are a lot of large gaps to fill in this way, and it ends up taking a lot of time, but this is really key to changing the character and look of the build and turning it into something more than a toy. While all of that milliput is drying, I also glue the elevator in place where I want it, right at the very top of the structure. Now, I used super glue, but hot glue would have been fine here too. At the same time, I start adding beads and other decorations to give things a more interesting shape and more texture. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking that, no, all I'm really doing is bedazzling a dollhouse, well, you're not wrong. But like any other project, whether it's crafting or painting a mini, there's usually an ugly phase in the middle where it would be easy to doubt the time and effort you're putting into something that just doesn't look that good. But have faith, trust your own vision for your projects, and push through. Sometimes things just have to get a little bit worse before they can start coming together. Once the milliput is dried completely, I take a fine grit sandpaper and go over all of our filled in gaps. In fact, I go over the entire dollhouse, even the parts that we haven't done anything to. Now, this cheap, shiny looking toy plastic is not particularly good at taking primer or paint, so making some micro abrasions on the surface is going to help the paint stick to it. Now, this takes a while, so it's a good time to put on a podcast or an audiobook, or just put on some music and vibe while you work, because it's going to be work. A lot of it. This thing's huge. What was I thinking? Anyway, once it's sanded, it can be primed. Now, this is going to be getting a lot of layers of paint, but the first step in covering up hot pink is a simple rattle can white. As you've probably noticed, aside from this one back wall, the temple has no texture at all. So we're going to fake it. I take 3 different craft paints, a medium brown, a pink, and an orange, and I just blend them really roughly over all the surface using a kitchen sponge. Now, this kind of rough, random pattern and blending is a good way to give something a bit of visual noise and the impression of texture, even though it's perfectly flat. I do want a bit of color too, though, so the bottom 3 layers of brick on each floor get a stripe of color. Right now this is really going to stand out, but by the time we dry brush and wash things in future steps, it will look a lot more natural. And that leaves our dollhouse temple looking like this. Once all of your paint is completely dry, you can start dry brushing. Now, I chose an off-white craft paint. I think this one was called Linen, and I just hit everything. Well, almost everything, not the roof, obviously, and not the floors, but all of the walls and columns and all of the details that I added in previous steps. I'm pretty heavy-handed with this dry brush because I'm relying on it to help make details pop out again and to add that extra visual interest. The rooftop is a different story. To me, it looks like scalloped bronze shingles, so that's what I go with. 2 different bronze colors painted over top of each other to cover the roof. But I still want more color on the front of the temple too, so I just take the same bronze and add it to the rings on some of the columns. I didn't add any on the inside though, since I'm not trying to draw the gaze there, and it's going to be decorated with scatter later on anyway. That brings us to my secret weapon for covering the holes in the roof. Now, these are 3D printed relief sculptures from ancient Rome. These are available for free online, and I just resized them to my needs. Then I spray them dark gray, and to get an easy marbling effect, I wrap a used dryer sheet around them and spray over top with white. I ended up deciding to glue the front doors shut since I thought actively opening and closing them would scrape off paint. And then I just bring in the teal color that I used on the back of the temple. I give them a dry brush to add some texture, and I highlight them with the same bronze as the roof. Reusing those colors helps to make the paint scheme more cohesive. But there is one more huge step still to go. Now, as I understand it, the ancient world wasn't huge on elevators. And since I've already glued mine in place anyway, I'm going to need another way to get between floors. So out comes the XPS foam, the aluminum foil for texture, and the glue. I probably shouldn't admit this, but I just kind of eyeballed this whole process, roughly fitting it in as I went along. And once the staircases were built, they just got the same paint treatment everything else did. The same 3 colors, the same wet blend, and the same dry brush. Of course, if you really don't like building stairs, you could get creative. There's nothing wrong with solving a build problem with lore. Maybe there are magical portals or some kind of teleportation. But I like a good staircase that the players can fight up and down. And then it's finally time for the last part of the structure build, an oil wash. I used black, brown, and yellow ochre pigments to give it a nice, rich, dark color. I also use lots of white spirit though, because I really want this to be pale. I don't want an overwhelming wash that's going to drown out all of the detail work. Instead, I just want some extra shadows and contrast. A thinned oil wash is perfect for that. Okay guys, so that leaves our project looking like this. The structure side of it is finished, all of the construction parts are done, and I've faked this cool stone texture all over all of this smooth flat plastic, and I think it's looking pretty good. I am going to leave it here for this video though. This has been a little bit of a crazy month for me. I've had a few personal emergencies going on in my own life. One of them involved an overnight trip to an emergency vet with my pet cat. It's been a rough time, and it's taken me a lot longer to get this video out than I wanted to. And I'm sorry for that, but sometimes this other stuff has to come first. That said, I'm pretty happy with this part of the video, and in the next part, I'm going to go through and make all of the scatter and extra stuff that's going to turn all these empty spaces into the story-rich environments we talked about in the first part of the video. So if you want to see that, please hit like and subscribe and come back for the next one. Stick around. I do this kind of stuff all the time. Also, if you're interested in financially supporting the channel, there are links below to do that, and I hugely appreciate it. Just like I hugely appreciate all of you taking your time to watch. Thank you guys. I'll see you on the next one where we can finish this project up and hopefully do some pretty exciting stuff with it.